Hi, my name is Florian Hoffmeister. I'm the cinematographer of Pachinko, and this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Florian Hoffmeister BSC, the director of photography of Pachinko on Apple TV+. Florian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
I love this show. It's just so unique, and 8 episodes. I think the final episode is yet to be released. Right, I'm still catching up to it, but I think it's as of this moment. I think we're still a week out. Am I right?
That's correct. This Friday, I think it finishes.
So it's a long-winded way of saying that by the time this episode is released, the entire series will be out. So all of you guys listening, go and check it out for yourself if you haven't already. The show is called Pachinko. And there's so much to talk about. And we'll get to all of it in just a moment. But before we get there, I just want to talk to you guys. I don't ask for much. I ask for very little. But I want you to go and subscribe to us on YouTube. Now, there's a reason why. First of all, we post all of our interviews on YouTube. And when we do that, you get to see the guest as they're talking. And we also have these things called show shorts, which are little clips of each episode. And we enhance those with behind the scenes photos and videos. It's a great way to have the full Go Creative Show experience. So head over to YouTube, search for Go Creative Show, subscribe to us, and don't forget to click on that bell so that you're notified when we release new videos. Of course, all things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. So, Florian, what is Pachinko? Just give us like the elevator pitch. What is the show about?
Elevator pitch is a good thing. It's an adaptation of a successful novel that I don't know when it was published, a few years back. It describes the family saga of this Korean woman that from her birth and then her movement over to Japan. Lots of people left colonialized Korea to, go into diaspora and make their fortune in other places. And I think that's a particular thing that how Soo Yu, the showrunner, actually adapted the novel, because the novel, I think, has a linear narrative. And she came up with a concept that later on the story develops that the main character is called Sunja, and her grandson returns from the United States, where he's been working in a bank in Japan. And Soo Yu developed these two timelines, basically birth and Sunja's growing up in the colonial Korea with the 1980s timeline of her grandson Solomon returning to Japan.
Well, what's interesting,
basically the story.
And what's interesting about this is that you're playing in two different time periods throughout the whole show. And what I think a lot of cinematographers, a lot of directors of photography would do and have done is change the look of the series to reflect the different time periods. I mean, changes in the lenses and the lighting in the camera. For this, it doesn't seem as though you did that. It seemed like you wanted to keep something similar throughout. And I think that's a really interesting approach. And I want to talk to you about that. Why, or I guess, how did you handle the changes in time periods in Pachinko?
Yeah, I mean, when we started working, so, I was Block 1 cinematographer. So I got involved in this quite early, about roughly 2.5, 3 months before you actually start production. So I received all the scripts. And I went to Korea. We did some location scouting, and then Koganada, who's the director who did the first block with me, arrived as well. And we had these long chats and conversations about what we wanted to do. And there's one way of looking at cinema simply as a succession of moments in time, because that's how we receive it. It's like A meets B and C, and it just runs along. There's another way of looking at it, of course, more as a depiction of space. So that actually time doesn't really matter that much. It's more the way that you depict space and how you actually ground people in the space that they are living. And, in the main character, Sunja, both timelines in a way happen simultaneously. One is that, her grandson is visiting her. And the other one is, of course, all the memories of her past. Now, the series itself starts linear in a way that we are being told the story of Sunja being born and then growing up, but then it cuts quite quickly to Solomon. And I thought it's far more interesting to challenge the audience, to if you get to almost diffuse some of the framework so that, the unexpected stimulates you more, you're opening yourself actually more to the story, we felt, as if we had done it by the book, you kind of cut over, say, oh, I'm here, oh, I'm there, so it just keeps it, you keep the audience more on their toes, so to say, and hopefully, enable people to engage more, because there's a lot of things, of course, that could keep you from engaging. It's all in foreign language, it's subtitled, so that was our way of entry into this. And I'm very happy about that, by the way. I think
having having some consistency in it, I think, is helpful as, an English speaking audience member watching it. I see what you mean. It's like you don't want to have too much distraction going on. But you had mentioned something a moment ago about this idea of capturing space and characters in space. What do you mean by that?
Well, we always thought that when she actually leaves, which is in episode 4, this is when the second block takes over. And I want to credit, director Justin Chon and his DOP, Andy Cheng, then took over and continued the second block of the series. She goes to Japan. She gets to Osaka and ends up in this tiny neighborhood with like really cramped spaces. This girl has grown up on an island, very poor, but exposed to the countryside, to the elements, and suddenly she sits in this tiny little box in Osaka. So we felt that in the first 3 episodes, we really wanted to ground people so that basically, as an audience, we have kind of had the same experience, the same spatial experience. So by the moment she actually, walks down the tiny little street and ends up in this little box house, that you almost feel it. And you don't even need to, the characters don't need to talk about it. You can just feel when the moment she opens the door, puts out the washing in that courtyard, you go like, God, this is crazy. The difference. That's what I associated and Kogonada talked about, and I talked about the concept of space.
So that's more in the set design. That's more in the the locations that you're choosing, versus creating a different world through lens and camera.
It's a bit, although it is an abstract way of saying we would shoot it quite loose. So basically we didn't want to end up just in the close-ups. And also we shot large format digital cinematography. So, digital cinematography has advanced a lot with the sensor sizes getting bigger and bigger. Now, I personally, I'm not that much interested in the gain of resolution. I find it rather interesting how the field of view changes with the lens. So basically, if the sensor gets bigger, the field of view gets bigger as well. And you can use, like a 50 mil that probably has about the field of view of 27. So you can compose, iconic close-ups while still, giving more, like almost like shooting anamorphic, like allowing more of the spatial orientation. So we would shoot looser, our close-ups would be like from shoulder up, we very rarely went really tight. We shot large format. And this way, we wanted to create a more like a constant awareness of space, as opposed to traditional way to say shoot a wide shot and then you go in and get tighter, in a way.
How does that support the story, in your opinion? That style of shooting being a little looser, coming out maybe further than someone traditionally would in a close-up. What does that do for the story?
Well, what I think is, I think the story is very, very strong from, it was the writing was very strong. So you have these really existentialist conflicts of people going away. You have the suppression of the colonial system. You have a girl that is, pregnant from another man. They're not married. Like, so these really big themes. So to me, I always try to my personal approach to cinematography is a bit like, I don't want to put a head on a head, so to say. So it's more interesting what you can bring in addition, and sometimes what you also take away, so not to distract. So I thought that if we root this story in this place, that would be the biggest achievement the cinematography would have to do. To create an atmosphere that's almost, you can almost smell the kimchi, you can almost feel the rice, you can feel the elements. That was the idea, and the story, I think, is almost strong enough to just run on its own feet.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it's a unique approach and one that really complemented the storyline as well. And like I had mentioned before, the most of it, is in Korean and Japanese. There are moments that are in English, but they're fleeting. So you're watching subtitles, and I was shocked to hear that you did not speak either of those languages.
No, when I got sent the scripts, I'd worked with Suyu, the showrunner, before. So we did a series called, the first season of a series called The Terror. And so we knew each other, we had established some form of trust. But I, when something like friendship, you're fortunate enough to take something like a friendship away from a working relationship, I don't really expect to be asked necessarily again, because there's as many cinematographers as there is people in the world. So, and maybe I'm not the right person, but she sent me the script anyway. So I read and I thought, man, this is such a Korean story. Would I be the right person to do this? And it's also what I find personally, it's also a reflection about what it means to be Korean. In many ways, I think it's a tribute that the Koreans of our generation give to their parents and their grandparents about the hardship that these people have gone through to enable, these people now to live in the States and, pursue all these creative things. But then I came to Act 3, where there is, and I won't spoil it, but there's the moment when Sunja and her future husband discuss the potential of going away. And there was such an amazing scene. And considering, what is at stake for the characters, it was such an adult way to negotiate something. And I thought, I have to do that. It doesn't matter to me. They could speak, and I also thought maybe, if you approach it, my curiosity that I have as a, outsider to what's happening can also enable me to search for something more universal, in the imagery, so that I could help, maybe, to open the story up to people that are not from that culture. And practically, there is English is not, there's, of course, there's tons of Koreans that speak English, but within the Korean film industry, there are definitely some people that don't, and we had to work with translators. But it also applied to many people. And Kogonada, for example, he's born Korean, but he grew up in the States, so his Korean isn't, on spot either. So some of the whole crew had to go through translators at times,
How does it affect the cinematography and decisions that you make when you're filming when you don't know the language that's being spoken by the actors?
Yeah, of course, we had English translation of the script, so I knew what was going on. I sometimes almost found it liberating because you don't really, you're forcing yourself more to observe feeling and emotion as opposed to content. So I actually found it quite liberating. There's, of course, things when you shoot yourself into a scene and you're like in a third or fourth version of a take and it's all about repetition, then you will, of course, lose out on the subtlety of the performance, and that's a bit of a shame because they were great actors. And I always enjoy when you film, when you have a great actor or even somebody who is just starting out, but finding his voice, how people shape, their performance. And that's, I just had to leave that to other people, Did
it almost make you more focused on other things? Like, it's sort of like the idea of one of your senses was gone, you know what I mean? And now every other sense is heightened because you're no longer maybe thinking about the dialogue as much as you normally would. Did it have any effect on that?
Yeah, in a way, you take away one of the, because I think you have to rely more to stay with your vocabulary. You have to rely more on your senses because your intellect can only operate on a central level, because some of the dialogue that was content driven, for example, you just kind of forget about it, and you approach the scene more with an intuition, maybe, so yes, pros and cons. I thought it was a gigantic privilege, because personally I try to approach cinematography very much as I try to forget about the technicalities of it. I sometimes cheekily say I don't even know how to switch on a camera anymore. And, the digital cinematography as well has so many things, so many numbers and names you can use that can really distract you from what it actually means to make a picture. And hence I thought it was a real privilege, to be thrown into this situation and work this way.
So you're not really a technical guy. You sort of like just feeling it. I mean, am I right about that?
Well, no, I am saying it. Of course, you have to have technical knowledge, but in my own awareness tries to, because, when we shot celluloid, not that long ago, but say maybe like 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't know about the exact chemicals that the lab would use. You would know about something, you would know them at the temperature if you do push or pull process, but that's about it. The rest you just,
Yeah.
Now I sometimes feel like the terminology is so specific that it would almost mean you would go to a lab and say, oh, are you using, whatever, Bayer company's bleach or whatever,
That's an interesting analogy. And you're right. I mean, the terminology has just changed, but still the idea of maybe not knowing every single detail of the processing with celluloid, that's a really good analogy. I like that. A lot.
The benefit, of course, I think when we shot celluloid was that you would, because of it had to go to the lab. Some people would touch it, a grader would grade it. And sometimes you would have these findings. You would come and see something and it would look slightly different, maybe even a mistake. And you go, wow, that's amazing. And I think that's the key bit in when you create, that you leave yourself these spaces that you can still discover something,
You mentioned something a few moments ago about not being sure if this was the right project for you because it was so uniquely Korean. And it brought something up that I've been meaning to talk to our guests about. And I always kind of forget, but that just reminded me. When do you say no to a project? Like, how often and when, and what might be some of the criteria that makes you say, no, this isn't right for me? Because that's a big decision. I mean, you're passing up a lot of money. You're passing up the potential to work with new people. It's like, that's a huge, it's one thing to say no to a small corporate gig, like a local area corporate gig, or even a small commercial, but to say no to a film or a TV show, that's a big decision. And I'm always curious about when and why people say no to projects.
Yeah, I mean, I just at the start, it's a really good question. At the start, I just want to make sure it's not that I can afford that necessarily. It's not that like I'm going through these stacks of scripts. So I'm not, I was more probably when I was talking about it in relation to Pachinko, I was more thinking about, the sense of responsibility you feel towards, a working relationship that I had with the showrunner. So
Sure.
We are, of course, we've gone past. When I turn down things, and if I can afford turning down, I mean, sometimes it is because it has been a road well traveled before. For example, recently I got sent something that took place in the world of the British police, and I've shot a lot of work in England for about 15 years, and I've when I went there first. I could even photograph one of those red telephone booths. And I would say that's the most remarkable thing because, it was foreign to me.
Yeah.
And I read this and the scripts were really well written and it was fantastic actors. And it was also describing a conflict that was beyond police work. So it was a lot about, a little bit like, say, Heat, Michael Mann. It takes place in the police world, but is actually about other things. But I could not get my head around how I would create an image that I had not seen before. Yeah, either as an audience or that I would have seen in myself. So if you feel this is just going to be repetitive, then I try if I can. I try. Then I won't be a good asset then. People will pay me money. And I think you need to get people that are either hungry or that have something in themselves that they want to bring to the project that's unique.
I love that. And that is a big decision to make. I mean, I hate turning down small projects. I can't even imagine turning down something big like that. But you want to grow, you want to learn, you want to add to your portfolio, but you personally want to grow with every project you have.
And then one thing that probably plays into this decision and that makes a gigantic difference is, I spent literally, I was in Korea for 4 months, and I came home for Christmas, and then I went to Vancouver for 3 months to shoot on the stage work. So you're on the road for 7 months.
Yeah.
You're giving up a lot of things. You give up any kind of social life, any kind of regularity. I'm not a member. I don't have a hobby because I just can't, apart from maybe going jogging or bicycling by myself. So you give up a lot. You give up seeing your family. And if it's then something that doesn't weigh up with what you say no to, in terms of a life, if there's nothing that is being brought as an addition to that, then it can get a very lonely job.
Did you bring family with you at all?
Well, we couldn't because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because my kids go to school. So normally people travel, they would come and visit me for their vacation, but they would have had to quarantine 2 weeks each way.
Yeah.
And it was impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's difficult. I mean, what a dramatic change to someone's life when they have to up and go and move and be out there for many, many months. I don't think a lot of people think about the kind of commitment that it takes to do one of these long form series. I mean, that's a lot of effort. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of time away.
And I think that it's a significant change to the, to the work environment for everybody working in the film industry, because the push is going so strongly towards streaming and go towards multi-episodes. So, normally you would get a call and say, this is a film, or like a one-off film for, whatever, however it gets broadcasted for TV or the cinema. Say in TV world, it would have been not such a big commitment, but you would say, oh, I'm away for 4 months or something. Suddenly, people say, they call and say it starts in August, you come back, June next year. It just, everything is so big, because these streamers just go in and say, well, we're going to do 8 episodes or 10 episodes.
I know you can only speak for yourself, and I'm asking you to, but I also want to get your opinion just broadly. I mean, I know you said the industry is moving towards these kind of episodic long form things because the public is wanting it. But from an industry perspective, is that something that you guys in your industry are excited about, or is it a little bit daunting to think that, okay, well, this is the way projects are going now? It's more likely I'm going to get a series than a film.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, first of all, I think it's what's good about all of this is the level of high-end production is just extreme. Everything has to look really amazing. So it's people won't debate your request for technology all the time. Maybe they will do sometimes, but if you go in and say we need this and this and this, most of the people say yes, because we will, we want this to look unique and good. So that's a good thing. I also think that the entire color pipeline, it's an amazing fact that we can watch things on the computer, on the iPad, on the phone. It all looks the same now. So you really can ensure consistency. I think there's so much stuff. I don't know who's going to watch that all. I mean, that's, I never keep up because I'm working. But so the question is, I read an article recently that said if somebody in the UK would try to watch everything that was on that week, it would take 86 years. It's just, you go like crazy. And what does that also to an industry? Because, when I started out, we would follow certain people. We cherish cinematographers. Of course, we cherish directors, That's really hard to build this is more about what, the logo that's at the end or the front of the show. It's not that much. Of course, we've got these, gigantic artists that, Netflix is also taking and putting out on the poster. But in essence, there's hundreds and hundreds of people you would never know the name.
Yeah.
So I think it's an exciting time, but it's also not without challenge.
Yeah. Let's talk about the look of Pachinko. We had mentioned that there are multiple time periods. There's a very specific episode 7 that's very different. We'll get to that. But just in general, how do you describe the look of Pachinko? And being responsible for the first 3 episodes, right? You did 1, 2, 3, and then 7. Largely, it was kind of your vision that ushered the overall look of the show. So what is it? How do you describe it?
Have a look and see. I'm bad with, so I can describe the process, how we got there. So we spoke about
there you go.
So it was clear we wanted to go down large format cinematography. The next step is choosing the lens. So we looked at large format glass. And of course, there's, people are very used to glass that has a lot of aberrations and leaves an imprint, goes soft to the edges, strange flares. We felt we wanted something that was very immediate. So we wanted to avoid an additional optical layer that would distract you. So it had to be clear. The next thing is but clear means clean oftentimes, and we definitely didn't want to go clean. So we searched for quite a while to find a good performing large format lens that had enough of an beauty and attitude to it, but didn't have too much aberrations and bokeh. And that were the Panavision made a beautiful lens system called the Panaspeeds, and those we chose. And then we went and the next step was, the camera was chosen. We went with a Sony Venice because I think it has a beautiful depiction of color. It was always clear. We wanted something that was colorful. And the Sony has a great ability to depict color in the highlights. And so we chose the Sony and the Panaspeeds. And then we go, and I try to start shooting tests very early in pre-production. So even just getting a camera, a couple lenses, just shoot something. So we to establish a common language with the director. So we shot these tests, and I sent the footage to New York to a grader that I've worked with, who is a bit of a legend, is Tom Poole.
Oh yeah.
And we discussed, finding a LUT. I tried to find one single LUT, almost like as if you were to look for a celluloid print emulsion. And I sent a couple of reference images. I stumbled across some photography by a Magnum photographer called Bert Glynn, who did some very early color photography in Japan. So, you see how the colors don't roll off all in sync. Like the reds might develop slightly different in the highlights and then in the blacks, then the blues. So it's more of an organic feel. So I sent him that, and I sent him some color photography of Gordon Parks, who I really admire. And with those, he went into his laboratory and turned the knobs and came back with something that, had a very organic feel in terms of color, a saturated feel, but kept very beautiful skin tones and had this amazing photochemical look. And then with that LUT, we went back and shot a big makeup test and costume test with the cast. We tweaked a bit, and then that was that. That's the look. So it should feel, I always feel that color can guide the eye, of course, but it can also just instill a sense of beauty. When you look at an image and you just say, oh, that's amazing. And it's so hard to put it in words. And that's what, in these 8 or 9 weeks that we prepped, that's what I was trying to get to, like almost a sweet spot where you react emotionally. And then everybody, ironically, in the room will agree. We said, that's it, So that's just what we did. I can't put it into a single pitch line. I'm sorry.
No, we don't want that. This is a long form conversation. We got to fill airtime. So that was perfect. I'm actually looking right now at Gordon Parks. I'm not really familiar with Gordon Parks' photography, but in a quick search, it seems like black and white is pretty much his thing. And the color photography is very rare. In fact, I'm even seeing an article here that I'll put in the show notes saying Gordon Parks' long forgotten color photographs.
I stumbled across those. I just know him as a character and as a filmmaker, of course, an artist. But I stumbled across these. I think he did it either for Life magazine. I think he went south or something. He did in Louisiana. He was doing some documentary work, and it has a great immediacy, in the way that he photographs the people in their living space, but also it had a beautiful, beautiful color range. So,
There's a lot of exteriors in Pachinko, at least in the first few episodes. And, it's a great way to really understand the landscape, the environment that these people are living in. But there must be some challenges, as a cinematographer filming outside with the sun. I know there's one scene in particular that you called out in other interviews, and I'd love to talk about it now, is the dragonfly scene in the very first episode, because you are shooting at actual sunset, and there's certainly some challenges with that. Can you just talk to us about kind of like your overall philosophy for exteriors in Pachinko and also that scene?
Well, yeah, I mean, the strange, I think there's two contradicting forces at work. One is, of course, every cinematographer would always like to shoot either in the morning or in the evening and avoid the high sun.
Yeah.
Now, I am always a slightly, you when you do your prep, you of course nominate that and you say, you talk to the first and he said, I would love to shoot this there. And then they say, oh yeah, of course, noted, and then 3 weeks later they come back with a schedule and it disregards like every single time. And sometimes it is true. It is not possible, because we have to, value whatever turnaround times, actors availability and all that. So I've made my peace with that. Oftentimes you cannot choose the time of day, but that's crucial. In that particular instance, we wanted to shoot it. We had this field in the actual village where we shot most all the farm stuff. And ironically, for reasons I don't know, that field burned down like 3 days before we wanted to shoot.
Oh my God.
And then they had to find, because we couldn't change the schedule, we had to find this other spot. And we just by chance found this little perfect little field that was perfectly, orientated towards the west. And it was, I think, on our first or second shooting day. So we were still struggling with the different working methods and communication. So we finished our work in this one place, jumped in cars and drove over there. And then we waited. And people had sent the trucks to the wrong place. So I was just thinking, man, this is going to be crazy. So by the time everybody, realized they'd made mistakes, and by the time we were ready to go, we literally had 20 minutes and we literally put the Steadicam onto our A camera operator, a lovely gentleman called John Clothier, and we just shot. And that's it, and then the spur of the moment, and the light was perfect. I mean, you could have probably overworked it endlessly, but it was just right the way it was. There's one little thing I would love to add, because we just touched on it earlier about, us having set up the look, of course, in Block 1. In this particular instance, Block 2 was directed by Justin Chon and shot by Andy Cheng, who's like his longtime collaborator. And I heavily lobbied with the showrunner that we should approach this less in the traditional series way, with having established a Bible in Block 1 and then everybody just executes that. Because Justin is, and Kogonada are so different directors and authors and independent filmmakers that it felt it would be too limiting to, not have them have their own freedom. So they took some deliberate choices and veered off our track. For example, we never used handheld because we didn't feel it was appropriate. They shot tons of handheld, We didn't differentiate by lenses. They did decide to differentiate the timelines by lens choice. So, I think we kept it a bit more open, which I thought was creatively more liberating for everybody.
They must have loved that, not having to come in at the halfway point and do, follow someone else's Bible. That's a really, that's a gift for them.
Yes, well, yes, and yeah, but we also were, due to the nature of the COVID schedule, we actually had to shoot simultaneously. So that meant we had one crew, and we would shoot. Koganad and I would, for example, do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, Friday, and Justin would take over. So it was actually a very close working environment, and that's also brings you back to your question that you initially asked about serial production. And one of the downsides is, if you shoot a movie, you're only responsible for yourself. So if I get behind, I can say, oh, I'll make it up next week. Or I can really decide where to put my emphasis, and I spend the money here and I save the money there. Where if you are in a serial context, there's other people. So you cannot spend all the money because Block 2 needs some money. Or in our instance, if we were shooting on the Wednesday and we wanted to go over, we couldn't, because on Thursday morning they had to go to a certain location and they had to get up at 6 o'clock. And, so there you're far more entwined in a serial context. And that's limiting at times.
There's another scene that I'd like to talk about from episode 1. We're essentially in a fishing village. I mean, fishing is a major part of these characters' lives, especially in the earlier episodes. And Sunja's character has this connection to the water. And after her father dies, she goes back to the water where she goes and fishes. So there is some underwater work here. There's some crane work that you bring right out into this cove. It must have been filled with challenges. I mean, that's a big giant crane is a hard thing to move around, especially bringing it right to the edge of the sea in a cove. I mean, talk to me about that decision and the challenges you faced.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good, because, in the beginning of our conversation, I created this illusion of being not technically interested and just kind of shooting from the hip and making it up as I go along. So that is the complete opposite. So we had to do quite a bit of world building. So the actual village where we shot the boarding house is in the central bit of Korea. So there's no water around. So we had to create the world, and she would take this passage and walk to the water, and how we would make that work in filmic terms. And there was this cove near Busan, which where they still dive for fishing there. The women are still there that still do it. And so that was a very challenging environment, because it had, 120 or 200 steps on this little ladder coming down, and you of course couldn't carry a crane down that route. So I went to that place like 4 or 5 times. I went with the first AD, and I went with Koganada a couple of times, because we really had to make sure wherever we would bring the crane, that's where it would sit, and you wouldn't be able to move it on the beach. So that took a lot of prep. And also, we really plotted out where she would run and how long in the water she'd go. And then we actually had to get a ship with a gigantic other crane on the ship that would, travel into that cove and then lift our telescopic techno crane onto the beach. And, so, and it was all done days before, and it was a major operation, but it worked really well. And then the underwater stuff.
Well, hold on. Before you go to underwater, I want to make sure I'm visualizing this right. So you said it's like 20 or so steps going down into the cove.
120.
120. Oh my God, even more. All right. So what did you basically drove your crane up to the edge of the top of that staircase, and then?
No. We had the crane would actually, we had to hire a ship in Busan Harbor that would take the crane and bring it over the water, because there was no way you could lift it down or you could carry it down. So we hired this ship, which had another crane on it, just for harbor work. Which made our crane look tiny. It was really funny, because it weighs, I don't know how many tons. It's a 50-foot techno that weighs, I don't know, probably, a ton. I don't know. Anyway, so, and then the ship took him on the harbor, drove in the morning of the day before, 2 days before, and then lifted the crane onto the environment. And then we had the grips, built this platform, and then they would put the crane on there, and it was tidal, so we had to kind of, negotiate where exactly it could sit, because the tide would come in and out.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So,
what a complicated, I'm surprised you didn't get pushback from producers. Someone must have said, do we really need to do this?
like, no, we had those conversations a lot because, because there's, different ways of, and here we come back to our initial, to the start of our conversation that, the space, how do you pick space?
Yeah.
Of course, there would be one school of thought that would have said, get 4 cameras, place them all, and then let the girl run and go swimming, and then you film it, and then get maybe a camera on the water. And Kogonada, said, no, let's have her walk in one shot. So that was clear. We wanted to do it in one shot, and there's only one cut in the because the kid is mourning the loss of her dad, and we really wanted to stay with her and go into the water with her and experience the space. So we had to stand our ground, and they were, we had a good production team. I mean, they were questioning heavily, but in the end, they said, "Okay, let's try and pull it off."
Yeah,
but the Korean language is very hierarchical, so it's very polite, and you would never dare to tell somebody who you regard superior that something isn't working. And to get through all this politeness to really figure out, will we be able to really do this? Will we get the ship? That was a very, complicated process.
Talk to me about the underwater scenes.
Yeah, and then so we had, that's the other world. So you couldn't do any underwater work there, of course, because it's the open sea. So we actually built a little pool in Vancouver. That was actually quite small by dimension. I think it must have been maximum of maybe like a diameter of maybe 10 meters or something, maybe a bit more, maybe 15, a circular pool, and it was probably 3 meters deep. And we set that up in the parking lot. And then we had a very good underwater cinematographer, and we shot it for about two-thirds of a day. So that was crucial, just the choice of lens to really go back and photo, because in essence it's the same space. You just have to by changing lenses, you have to make it look her tiny as if she's in the open sea, and then you swim with her. But we really have to credit Brendan Haggerty for doing an amazing work.
Absolutely. All right, let's get to episode 7, which I just watched this morning. It's fresh in my mind and just stunningly beautiful. And it's a departure from the show. Like, a lot is different about this episode. I think probably the biggest change is the aspect ratio. You immediately tighten it up. It's a smaller kind of box within a box. And I'd like to actually start there. And your thoughts on, first of all, you can tell us about what this episode is, why it's different from the series. But I'm interested in how you made the choice to have the different aspect ratio, and what role does a change in aspect ratio play over the course of a series like this?
Well, so first of all, I want to credit Soo Yu, the showrunner, because she came in quite early on, adamant that this had to be very, very different. And also, she's a very visual person, so she also said, let's shoot it at a different aspect ratio. That was very clear from the beginning. This stems partly from the fact that I think the episode tells a backstory that the novel never explores. So it's about this character Hansu, and she wrote this episode about why he's become who he has become, which was never, that story was never told in the novel. So I think that already in itself was a reason to almost make it feel like standalone, like a commentary more than, part of the regular adaptation. In addition to that, it tells the story of the Yokohama earthquake. And of course, that was a very, very, it's an epic disaster on an epic scale. And the script wasn't shy of describing that. So, of course, we are also limited in terms of the means that we have to actually, show an earthquake. So I always felt that the interested when you limit your aspect ratio is you start to work with the, you almost make the audience imagine a world that happens outside of your aspect ratio. You can frame things in a way that will evoke the thought of a continued world within the mind of the viewer without having to show it. And I think that was a great advantage for me creatively by choosing, by going 4:3. In essence, it's a 4:3 frame, but we experimented a lot with aspect ratios on the show because Kogonada had a really beautiful idea in the beginning where he thought, normally we had roughly an aspect ratio of 1 to 2.2. So, he thought, what happens if we push if you don't letterbox the image with black and top and bottom, but if you push the image up and only have one black banner at the bottom, and that's where we put the subtitles. So the subtitles would feel more like a graphic element within the 16:9 container that it would be on an iPad. And it feels more like a banner, of a Polaroid. And the subtitles would not sit in the image. And we shot a lot of tests. That's how we ended up with 1 to 2.2, because it felt like the black would be big enough to accommodate subtitles, but not too big to take away the value of the image. In the end, Apple decided not to do that because they felt there was so much of an ask of the audience that they felt, if we also go this way, maybe we are so used to reading subtitles on the image, But because we started this process, we ended up with 1 to 2.2, and also that then affected the way that the 4:3 would be depicted. So that's why it feels like almost double shrunk,
Yes.
Because he could have gone full format on the 4:3, but they wanted to stay truthful to the original series, so maintain the same feeling of letterbox, and within that letterbox we would do the 4:3 image. So it's actually quite a small image, but it's it's a beautiful format to frame for, and especially when it comes to portraiture and then large format, and also it's because it's so used, it's also very much caters to for lack of better words, like an Asian sensibility, the way that things are compositionally. I think there's one filmmaker that Kogonada really cherishes, is Ozu. He shot most of his work in 4:3, always using the same lens, and it just has a different. It's hard to say, because we are, our cinematic or my cinematic heritage always strives for the snake, like the, anamorphic as being the king's aspect ratio. But in a way, I think the 4:3 just gives you a different way of accentuating the verticals as well. So I love it anyway.
Well, I think the aspect ratio was probably the best suited for the earthquake scenes when you're running through the town, because it is all about the vertical in those scenes. You're running through these narrow streetways and there's chaos everywhere and it's crazy. Talk to me about the way that you depicted this earthquake scene, because it's a major shift in the storyline. It dashes all hopes of our main character coming to America. And it also is like there's two huge extremes in episode 7 where you depict the ultra wealthy, and then you now have this major destruction with the town falling into rubble because of the earthquake. So you have a lot to do in this episode. And
and also, you can't, it's hard to find, we shot it on a backlot in Korea. So in Korea, they have this tradition of, building these backlots for a successful series. And then the backlots become a little bit like a museum. So you can, probably it's probably the same it used to be in LA. You go to the Universal lot, and actually there's more people traveling around in the cars looking at stuff than there's actual filming.
Yes.
So we ended up on these backlots in Korea that were quite limiting in size, but that was the only place where we could actually pull off this degree of destruction. So we talked about the aspect ratio enabling us to, only show part of the world and leave the rest to the imagination of the audience. And one step further down that line was that we chose, in the actual earthquake to tell it very strongly only from Hansu's point of view. So there was a sequence when he's just gone home, not to the home of his American, the family that he schools the boy for. And then they try to escape the flames that are approaching the house. And then it's this mayhem sequence that you probably referred to. Now we built the actor, Minho Lee, was wearing a body cam, so where the camera gets actually physically attached to his body. And we just had him run through this mayhem with the camera in front and one on his back. And that was kind of the core visual, how should I say that? That was like the shot of the heart of that sequence. And then we did only some POV work in addition to that. Because I think that's also a very strong point of working with Kogonada as a director. He's somebody that's very influenced by form as a way of thinking. So, in these instances, we would just try to make one decision, say it's his POV, limit the field of view, and go. And that's it. And then everything else we might try to make work within those confines.
Yeah, you had a lot of this like ash that was floating through the scene. It was everywhere. I know you were on that backlot, but I can imagine having that much ash, that much like white covering on everything must have been lighting-wise a bit of a challenge, because you essentially have a giant bounce now everywhere you look and everywhere you go. Was that something that was challenging to work with?
It's just what's challenging is to get, you can hardly get enough of that stuff. So the SFX people always say, yeah, that's good. And you got it more. You really have to, the sequence when they actually come out of the boxing hall, that was actually shot in Canada. And then the later stuff was shot earlier in Korea. So we did these tests, what kind of texture we would find and we would use. And you just have to bombard people with it. So it really feels overpowering. I think, if it almost has to feel like, if you're going down the route of real destruction and stuff in the air, you just have to double up or triple up all the time. So it's an overwhelming effect. And then lighting almost becomes secondary, but to encourage people to go that strongly and also to be able to work with, extras, human beings having to run through that, without masks, that was challenging.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to discuss with you is a lesson learned. I mean, every project I'm sure you leave with lessons, with something that you might bring with you to another project, or looking back and thinking, oh, I would have done that differently. Or what did you learn from your experience on Pachinko?
That's a good question. One thing is definitely, this kind of block shooting system we devised. I think it enabled us to shoot in a COVID-restricted environment, and it would actually enable us probably to shoot the show. If somebody had a different idea of how to schedule this, people would have probably said, let's wait until the pandemic is over. But that's challenging, to share a team with another director and another DOP. That is just, I would try not to go down this route again, because you're so much treading onto somebody else's life in a way. If I make a decision, it will affect these guys immediately if they make a decision. So that was less than ideal, but enabled us to shoot it. That's probably on the side where I think, I wouldn't do this again. I would definitely go to Korea in a second. That was just, it's just a remarkable place. And I thought it was a gigantic luxury to be able to work there,
What a great experience. Well, the show is awesome. Like I said earlier, the entire series should be out by the time this episode is released. So if you are hearing us talk, all 8 episodes are available on Apple TV Plus. And it's a really good series, great story, really good acting. The cinematography is beautiful, of course. It's called Pachinko, and it is on Apple TV Plus right now. Florian, where can people go to learn more about you?
Where can people go to learn more
your website, your Instagram? What do you want to plug?
I see. Oh, man, listen, I am not technical, and I am not the man of social media.
Well, what were you thinking I was saying?
I've got, you punch in my name, that will probably get you to my website. And I've got an Instagram feed that I never really attend. You know where they should go? In October, there's a film that's going to hopefully come out, I think, if they make it. It's called Tar, T-A-R. And it's a director, Todd Field, who has made his new film, which of all places, by chance, shot in Berlin. It stars Cate Blanchett, and it should be up in October. And that's when you can see something that I tried. Very different from Pachinko.
Is it a horror movie?
No. It's about a female conductor of a Cate Blanchett plays the female conductor of a famous German orchestra that gets kind of caught up in this kind of Me Too storm. So it's a really interesting film. Todd Field, fantastic filmmaker, and an interesting commentary and about cancel culture and all of that. It's really
that's
interesting.
Cool.
Film.
You also shot Antlers, right?
I did.
Yeah, but when I found out that you shot that, because I hadn't seen it yet, but it's been on my wish list of things to see. But as you know, it's there's no time to see anything. Yeah. But the trailer looks so good that I love that. I love horror movies, so I will definitely see it. And I was like, damn it. If I had known that, I would have saw that ahead of time. And
I would have said that would have been my nicer end line for this beautiful interview with you. I would have said, let's go and see Antlers, because I'm very proud of the look. And it got a bit lost in the pandemic, in its feature film style, the theatrical release. But we talk so much about streaming. I think these kind of films, like Antlers, it's still a communal experience. You have to go and see him in the cinema with other people in the dark. And I think now, as fortunately this pandemic comes to a slow end, we should all go and sit together in dark rooms again. It will make the world a better place.
Yeah, I've been doing that more and more for the show, just seeing stuff in theaters. And it's it really is such a difference. My God, It's so much. I just saw Everything Everywhere All at Once in a theater, which was just such a great experience. Anyway, the movie's so insane, but I can't imagine looking that on a phone or on an iPad while on a plane. You just can't. Yeah. You need that experience. But anyway, we're rambling on now. And so go see Pachinko, but then also go see Antler. I'm going to see Antlers. So I think everyone out there should be watching it as well. And when you are watching it, you'll know it's the work of Florian Hoffmeister.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. Thank you, Florian, for being on.
It. Thank you.
I want to thank Florian Hoffmeister BSC for coming on the show today. Check out his work on Pachinko and, of course, his IMDb. We'll put all of that stuff in the show notes. I want to thank our producer, Connor Crosby, for putting the show together. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com. And Dave Siegel, siegelsound.com. Dave's the guy that mixes and masters and makes the show sound so good. And I want to encourage all of you guys, head over to our YouTube and subscribe if you haven't already. For a couple reasons. One, you get to see the interview, which is nice because you get to see the cinematographers, get their gestures, get their hand motions, and just kind of really experience the conversation. But also, we are putting a lot of behind-the-scenes footage, a lot of B-roll, a lot of photos and things to accompany and really make the interview more well-rounded. We've been getting a lot of great feedback on those newer videos and, of course, our show shorts, which are little clips of each show. And we've really been building our YouTube page, and we want to just continue doing it. There's a community forming there, and we want you to be part of it. So please join, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let us know what you think. We want to improve. We want to get bigger and better on our YouTube page. And we really would appreciate your feedback. So please go there, check it out, and let us know what you think. Also, we sometimes even get to put photography that is just on the cell phones of our cinematographers, stuff that they filmed on set. So it's not stuff you'll just be finding on online somewhere. This is exclusive stuff oftentimes that we get from our cinematographers. So please do check it out. Go to gocreativeshow.com and you can get to us, our YouTube there, but you can certainly just go to YouTube and search Go Creative Show. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.